Welcome back. You've practiced a lot of the building blocks and basics of watercolor, and we're ready to dive into some more complicated paintings. But before we paint a big landscape painting, I think it'll help us to break it down a bit and start with some of the main elements that I use in almost every one of my landscapes: the sky, trees, and water. Let's take them each one at a time, and let's start with the sky. Okay, there are a number of things we can try for skies, starting with wet in wet. And I'm going to start with, well, my water's not perfectly clean. I still have some blue left in the bristles of that brush. This is my 1-inch flat brush. Paint horizontally first, and then we'll go vertically. And I'll be taking a paper towel to do a lot of this work, but let's start with a paper towel to just get that water off the tape line where the tape meets the paper, because that's where I'm going to get a lot of paint bleeding back, or water, I should say, bleeding back into my painting once I get started. What I'm envisioning for our first wet in wet try here is just to play around with some clouds. I want to make the cloud shape be interesting and have it fit what I'm going for in terms of my landscape. So I'm going to use a cerulean blue and Payne's gray kind of mix here. You could use any blue that you have. And I'm going to just get that paint as if I'm going to do a flat wash or a graded wash. I'm going to go ahead and get quite a bit of pigment into this paper, going horizontally and really flooding the paper with wet pigment. Okay, I'm going to fill up the whole paper, and I'm darker up at the top, so this is slightly graded, I guess you could say. And I'm gonna envision just some cumulus clouds in a summer sky, and I want you to play with these, because I want you to realize you are the boss. I mean, you can conduct this little orchestra the way you want to. I'm going to try to make my cumulus cloud be smaller, maybe at this side, and then gradually build up like a summer thunderhead might. And I'm going to try to use the paper towel like an artist uses a brush. We're really thinking about the shapes we're creating as we go. And if you want it to be more feathery, you just barely touch. Those little wrinkles and crumples that you have in your paper towel formation are what's going to be lifted from the paper. Let's look at the kind of shapes that I'm making here. I'm leaving sort of a triangular shape in this corner, having a buildup of a big cumulus cloud, and then maybe let's go down this way. You can go any direction, and you start to do this more, and you'll sort of get a feel for it. So let's take a look at what we've got there. Cumulus clouds. I'm going to mist this, my little misting bottle, mostly because it helps to kind of unify it, gets rid of places where the paper towel just really dried out the paper and made kind of a hard edge there. If you want more white in the middle of the cloud, you can go back now after you've misted and pick up a little bit more of that pigment that's in the middle, maybe. Again, I'm going to have the edges of my cloud sort of feather out. Maybe I'll mist it one more time. I hope you'll take a number of your little practice papers today and try to make a number of little cloud studies until you really get the hang of it and feel like you're the one that's in control. Okay, I've dried off the cumulus cloud study, and a couple of things I notice is that it's actually overall lighter than it was when I first painted it. That's what always happens, and that's why you want to really overdo it. It feels like you're exaggerating how much value and color and pigment you're putting into some of the dark areas, and then how light you're making the light areas. But this has got some nice variations of value. There's almost, I would say, a white paper right in here, and a few spots up here, and this is maybe like a number 3 or 4 on our value scale up to 5. What you want to start thinking about now is, how does this fit into a painting? You could have this just be most of the painting and just have a little bit of horizon down here at the bottom. It's that horizon that's going to be the punch. That's where you're going to put a firm color silhouetted basically against this sky, and it doesn't really matter. But if I just put a dark horizon line here, like we're way out on the prairie, I'm putting a little bit of raw sienna into this sepia kind of wash here. Maybe put a few hills in. Let's get a hill in here. I have been across parts of the Midwest that are pretty flat, but let's just put a little bit of a wrinkle into the landscape. and give a little texture to the landscape with our mist bottle. And now let's think about, how do the clouds help us? Well, they're creating a spot where it's lighter down towards the land. And if I were to build a little farmscape here, have some farm buildings and trees and windmills and fences, these clouds down towards the bottom are going to be the highlighters. That's what's going to show off your landscape. So you're going to think about the shape of clouds that you made, helping the viewer's eye to notice what's going on in your painting. It's kind of like you're painting the scene, you're painting the background scene for the stage play. Okay, we used tissue to make sort of cumulus cloud effects. Let's use a thirsty brush this time and see how we can use that to create some drama in our sky. Pretty much straight cerulean this time. Doing horizontal strokes with a 1-inch flat brush. And we want that to be a little darker up towards the top. I'm going to throw a little of that ultramarine up there so we have some variety in our color scheme. This is really close on the color wheel. It's towards purple from the blue. And once we have some nice rich color on there, let's see how we can, well, I'm going to mist it a little bit, and let's see how we can use thirsty brushes. I think my favorite thirsty brush really is that 1-inch flat, and the reason is all those bristles lined up can really suck up some pigment. And so I rinse it out in clean water, and I usually hold it in a rag or a paper towel, but it's damp, but it doesn't have much water in it. If I pull across just straight, it's going to be about a 1/4 of an inch thick white line that comes across my sky right there. You know, jet streams. Yay. Okay, but making it more interesting involves thicker and thinner, because variety, remember, adds interest. So I'll rinse in clean water, hold it in my rag, and go thicker, twisting the full inch wide, and then thinner as I twist and turn that brush. Rinse, rag, twist, and turn. You're keeping in mind a couple of different shapes at the same time. One is the gap that you're leaving, because that gap creates a sort of shape. And if it's a thin gap, you'll get that thin little gap of blue there. Wider white. And then you can go back and thirsty brush up sections within what you've already done. This can give you a pretty intriguing sky. Again, the color scheme I've used looks like a summer day pretty much, but you can certainly use these as a way of drawing your viewer's eye down into the drama of whatever else you're painting. I'd like to wrap up our sky experiments with throwing out a few other ideas. And these are all ones that will be fun for you to just get some small pieces of watercolor paper and do a few experiments of your own. The first one is to think about our very first exercise, and that was to make a flat wash. And if you start your paper with a flat wash over the entire surface of the rectangle, it's kind of like starting with an underpainting if you're an oil painter or an acrylic painter, to give your whole overall painting a sort of unity. Try that, starting with a flat wash that you've already made that's dry, completely dry, and do a painting over the top of it. That solid flat wash color is going to give it a sense of harmony. We don't need to stop for painting that right now, because I think you've got enough of an idea of going back to your flat washes and just play around with putting a painting on top of it. But our second one, rather than keep it a flat wash, have it sort of a mottled surface. And that would mean taking more than one pigment probably, starting with wet paper, get a super wet and wet situation going. Let's put water all over it. Let's drop some colors in and spray them and let them flow together. And it could be a dark, ominous kind of sky using darker colors at the top or cooler, and maybe warmer colors down at the bottom. But we'll just experiment with that. Let's stop now and let's play around with that mottled wash. Sometimes it's fun if you're doing experimental watercolor where you don't always have the result in mind before you start, to just play on the paper all over and not decide on your subject yet. This means I'm not going to be thinking and worrying about where I'm trying to have the clouds highlight some feature of the landscape or the little architectural part of my painting or whatever it is. I'm not worried about anything except just creating some beautiful color and designs on my paper. I'm going to start wet and wet, and I'm going to just load up with a series of colors. All of them are going to be within that realm from blue a little bit towards green maybe, and throwing in an occasional bit of Payne's gray. You could also even use some white watercolor paint, which we haven't really played with at all. Mostly we use the paper as our white, but this is a time if you're in experimental mode, you might as well go for it. So I'm going to get a puddle of cerulean blue started, and this is the most classic sky color, cerulean. I'm going to just cover the whole paper. It's already wet, so this is wet in wet, and it's just starting to run all over the place. I'm going to even go the other direction. Get some of those vertical lines in there instead of always just horizontal. I might mist it a little bit. This is going to keep that pigment moving. It's not had time to settle into the cells of that paper. Ultramarine is a great sky color. I'm going to just play around, just drop it in. This is ultramarine. I'll put some over here maybe. 3 is always a good number to keep in your mind as you're doing this because it's an odd number, and it tends to mean if you put 3 blobs of something down that they won't just look all stilted. They'll be unusual. They'll create some unusual patterns. I'm going to put a little bit of cobalt turquoise in here, keeping it wet. There's a blob of turquoise. It's about time for us to tip our board, I think. I'm going to pick it up here and just tip it one direction. Kind of watch what's happening. If there's something I really like, I might try to save it, but that sometimes leads to heartbreak. Better not to get too attached to anything on this kind of deal. But you will see some beautiful flowing together start to happen. It's about time for me to pick up a couple of these big blobs of water that are starting to do damage. They can overrun a beautiful tender wash. So that's why I'm taking a paper towel and sucking up this reservoir of water that's come down to this corner, maybe along this tape here, just so that can't come back in and start doing damage. Let's tip it again. I can see a wrinkle in my paper has created the Grand Canyon down through the center there, and I kind of want to avoid that, so I'm tipping away from it. If you want to lead the pigment away from something, you can partly do that by misting the place you want it to go. It's going to try to get to that water. If you mist this corner and then tip it, it should run that direction. But let's throw a little bit of paper towel work in here. I'm going to do this partly to suck up some of that Grand Canyon I was noticing. We can always add more pigment around that, but let's try that. I'll mist it again with my misting bottle, find a place where I really want it to be more white. I tend to want to connect areas when I'm doing just an overall design like this, not just to have one side against the other, but to try to have each shape kind of has a pathway to get out to the edge. That's going to tend to make a stronger design. Misting again, tipping again. Places where I have tipped the board and let the paint just run usually make a pretty soft edge, a pretty interesting edge. What I like about it is someone that looks at that later in the background of a painting, they're not going to really know how you painted it because it's not going to be obvious that I can see the brush stroke, or, oh, I know what she did right there. See, I like to have it more mysterious. I'm ready for some clean paper towel. There's that white area right there, and I kind of want to make that connection again across there. I think that might be about it. Let's let this dry and see what we think of it. Okay, well, it's dried lighter, as we knew it would. I'm going to take a little bit of clean water, and I see this one hard edge that happened because this one spot dried pretty quickly before anything else, and that paper stayed an island of whiteness in the midst of some really soft, interesting stuff. I want to kind of make that a little less obvious, a little more muted. I touched that with clean water on the tip of my 1-inch flat, and I misted over all that area. That just loosened up the pigment a little bit and let it start to float around. I might just tap my paper towel around there so it's not just a big puddle and let that dry again. It's going to be a wider area, but it's now going to be more integrated with the stuff around it. Something beautiful, something interesting to start with. One thing you have to throw away when you do this kind of experimental stuff is any preconceptions, any expectations that it has to turn out a certain way so that you can use it. Now it's your goal, your challenge is to figure out how to use what did happen. It might be turning the paper around and creating a vertical painting that has this remarkable northern sky, northern lights coming down. I don't know what you're gonna do with this. It's your job to find something. One thing I didn't talk about with composition is the idea of a vignette, which means a smaller work that's sort of in the center and bleeds out at the edges. And I got to tell you, there are some artists that make their whole career around starts like this. Very abstract, very juicy, wet starts, and then they go back into it and find beautiful scenery or people's faces or any number of things. So I leave that to you for further playing around, but this is just starting with a wet paper, wet and wet, mottled look for a sort of sky, and just see what happens and what you can make out of it. Let's try one more wet and wet sky idea and see if we can figure out how to really paint the clouds ourselves so we have quite a bit of control over the drama that we want to create on our paper. And I'm thinking of putting a fairly dark kind of cloud up here and then have it get lighter down here where I will put a tree and see if we can make the cloud sort of highlight the tree. I'm going to start with wet and wet, of course, and so I've gone both directions with clean water. Now I'm going to get started with that cerulean blue again and just get it on the paper, get some pigment on there so we get something to work with. I make my puddle over on my palette, just like always. Dip into that puddle of creamy melted butter consistency pigment. Okay, and now I want the upper part to be darker, so that's where I'm going to start throwing in a little bit more of that ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of Prussian blue if you've ever used that. That's a great color, and that'll make a darker sky up towards the top here. A lot of pigment, and then we'll get our paper towels to paint with. I think I will mist this a little bit just to help unify it, and then that'll kind of get some of those little strokes out of there. It'll start to let the pigment kind of blend with itself. And I'm going to wipe the edge of my tape right where it touches the paper so I don't have that little bead of water ready to run back in and cause all kinds of turmoil. Now I'm going to take my clean paper towel, get a paper towel section. I'm going to crumple it up till I make a shape that looks like it'll make some nice cumulus clouds like we've practiced. This time I'll start making a few clouds up in here. I'm going to kind of diagonal this composition a little bit, make it come down this way. And down here is where I want the lightest part. I'll have some trees on a hill right over in this area. Okay, I'm going to mist that. And now I'm going to take a round brush and load up with some darker paint. Maybe even a touch of that of Payne's Gray. Darken that up. Touch in around these clouds with even darker pigment. I'm sort of following what I did with my paper towel so that I'm leaving that white paper towel shape and I'm going around it with some darker pigment. I'm going to mist that in now. And I think I'm going to pick up my board for a second and tip it. Let some of those blooms of paint run. I'm really still painting, it's just that I'm using my eyeball and my hands to tip the board. When I see all this paint running down over here, I get nervous. I'm going to get that sucked up a little bit because that's ready to wreak havoc. Going to bring some of that pigment back down from that upper corner. I'm going to go back now and revisit this white cloud, painting it again with my paper towel. As long as I keep my paper wet, I don't have to worry. I'm in a way I'm revising and erasing, unlike kind of like breaking the rule that we talked about at the very beginning of our course, that we can't really change things and can't really erase, but this is as close as we get to it. Misting it again helps tie it together a little bit, helps get some of those bits of pigment to do some kind of a dance with each other. I think I'm going to let this dry now, and let's see what we can do with that spotlight the clouds have provided us. Okay, we're not completely dry, but at least we're pretty dry down in this bottom right corner where I was going to have the clouds highlight a spot for us where we have our little star of the show, which will be a little clump of trees. I'm going to use a mixture of Prussian blue. I'm going to take some blue and mix it with some raw sienna. That actually is blue plus yellow in a way. It's really blue plus brownish earth color. And you know blue plus yellow makes green. This makes a pretty interesting green. It's richer and darker than anything you're going to get out of a tube. So again, it's Prussian blue and a little bit of raw sienna. And I should test this on my little test sheet so that I kind of know what I'm doing a little bit. Yeah, that's okay. I might get a little bit more sienna into that. Test it. Okay, looking pretty good. Remember that round brush trick where I laid it down on its side and I brushed upwards? I think I'm going to try that. It's kind of a dry brush, kind of scraggly look. And I'm just going to make a little hillside of trees here. And just to get started, did it kind of quickly with the flat side of that brush. Not too great, not too excited about it yet, but let's get some more blue into my paint. I'm gonna really load this brush up. Actually, it's my brush I'm not too crazy about. This one I have abused so many times, it's looking kind of raggedy. I'm going to get a little dip back into that mixture of mixed green, which is really Prussian blue, raw sienna. And again, I'll just use this. I'm not trying to make perfect trees here. We'll talk more about trees later, but I'm gonna try to just have this cloud highlight what's going on down in this part of our painting. Get some nice darks in there. Okay, the trees aren't that important. I just wanted you to suggest them. You don't have to really worry about your trees, especially if you haven't really practiced making trees at all. It's just to have you notice something about what happens with our composition. Before I wrap this one up and get too crazy and fussy about it, I'm going to mist it a little bit. I'm going to take a super dark pigment, and that means I'm going to take some sepia and mix that with my Prussian blue. That'll be even darker. And right here seems to be my main drama point. I'm going to use a rigger right here and just finish a tree right about here. That will be darker than the surrounding trees. Just a few branches adds a nice design element. I'm going to take my 1/2 inch flat and just go with a little bit of a thirsty brush for a couple of trunks down here, a little couple of verticals. I do this because I'm thinking about the pathway of my viewer's eye. I've got this kind of interesting sky design and it's coming down, hitting right in here, and I just want to make that light and kind of exciting down there. I might even splatter a little bit of lighter color just to have some fun. Maybe take a little bit of medium yellow, put a little bit of medium yellow down in there with my toothbrush, hit my mister, and just having a little bit of fun with making the sky be the drama for us. Okay, for our third experiment, let's try using that graded wash again, but this time we'll add more color to it. And so I'm going to put a graded 3-color wash. Whoa, get that R in there. And a graded 3-color, I say that, but we could have even more pigments than that in there. But this is a nice way to let warm and cool colors blend and create an interesting background for the drama of your painting. In this case, I'm going to start with the graded wash of fairly cool colors coming down from the top. And in the middle is where I'll develop the painting later. But for right now, this will just give us a great stage to build that painting on. So we can also use more than one color in our graded wash. And there's only one caveat or danger I better talk to you about a little bit first. Those colors, they need to be able to be pretty friendly. They need to be near each other on the color wheel. Remember that we talked about analogous colors. And if I'm going to make my sky a series of 2 or 3 colors, I'm going to keep them pretty close to each other on the color wheel. Let's start with cerulean. That's the sort of the traditional sky color in watercolor paintings. Let's see what happens if we touch ultramarine next to that. Notice it's a darker value. That would bleed together nicely. That would work as a duo. And maybe a trio would be slightly moving towards green, which is towards turquoise and viridian. I'm going to maybe make a little bit of a mix even of viridian or turquoise. Let's throw a little turquoise in there and see what that does. I'm going to put it down on this end more towards the green. Now those three are going to be beautiful because they're pretty darn close to each other on the color wheel. I would not want to jump any much farther than that. So notice that we're going from the blue over to the green. So we've just gone from a primary color to its complement. And that's far enough. Okay. So let's think about making this a 3-color wash. I want to do all 3 of them above a painting that has a low horizon line, let's say. I think it'll be a fairly dramatic sky, and we'll let it kind of bleed together a little bit, but it's basically a graded wash where it's dark at the top and gets a little bit lighter towards the horizon, and then we'll let that dry and maybe punch in a dark silhouette down at the bottom, like the planetarium. Have you gone to those planetarium shows where there's like a little city or little houses or something down around the edge where they hide the lights at the bottom of the dome? I love that. And then the light comes up like dawn. Okay, I'm going to put clean water over the whole surface. I'm going to take a paper towel just to kind of protect myself from this water running back in there. I'm going to wipe around that edge. Okay, what do we start with at the top? The darker value, and that's going to be our ultramarine. And I'm not going to be afraid to get a lot of pigment on there because that's what's going to make this beautiful. Okay, I'm going to do it again. I'm going straight from my palette, just really drenching that. The danger, of course, is I'd get a big chunk of pigment in there, so it's smarter to make your puddle. I know. Okay, what about going straight to cerulean now? Get that puppy loaded. Bottom overlap. Nice. And I got to pretty quickly start getting towards that green. So let's go to turquoise and viridian down about here. Okay, now, what do you know about that could help you make that blend together nicely? One thing would be using your misting bottle. Yay, let's do it. I'm going to go one more pass of darkness up here because that's what's going to make this more dramatic. Misting bottle. Next, wipe up the edge. Get that stuff away from running all over the place. How else can we get those molecules of pigment water to lock into each other? Tip the board. Let's tip it up. Let the turquoisey greenish stuff go upwards first. Go to the side, lock it that direction. Tip it back up again. I'm not too crazy about going downward right now. I guess I better just so that you can see what would happen. Not sure what will happen actually, but it looks to me like there's enough dark pigment up there that this should be all right. It's running down a little bit. I can see a few rivulets coming down. I can get rid of the rivulets by turning side to side. It kind of makes those fade out into the fibers of the paper. That's bringing some run back from that piece of tape. Go back over towards the top. I'm going to mist it again. Okay, let's let this one dry and see what we can do with it. Okay, when it dries, we can sort of see if how we did on getting the gradation to kind of be smooth and gentle and feathery. I could see a little bit of a line here. I'm not going to worry about it too much because we're just getting started and practicing. You could do 3, 4, 5, 6 of these practicing, and it's always going to be helpful. You want to just get so you feel comfortable tipping your board, kind of watching the paint, and start wet in wet and get some juicy stuff going on. It's harder to control, but it's more rewarding in the long run. I'm going to just put a dark silhouette in here, and we'll finish this out with not out too much fuss. I'm going to take some sepia. Oh gosh, let's throw a little Prussian blue in with our sepia. That'll help kind of tie this painting together, I hope. And let's just put a dark lower spot down here, darker area, and right in here maybe we'll just make a forest of dark trees. How about that? Looking out over that forest as the sun's going down maybe. Again, please don't worry about your trees right now because we're going to do trees in just a second. But I'm just using a round brush pointing up into the sky so the shape of my brush mimics the shape of the top of a tree. And I'm going across this horizon with that brush just diligently pointing upwards. Down below that, we could keep going, but I want to have a little bit of variety. Don't want to be too boring in this horizontal line here. Just like every part of our painting, we want some variety. And especially, we want some dark down at that bottom. So I'm going to really load into that Prussian and sepia. I used my flat brush just because that's a lot faster way for me to get quite a bit of pigment on there. But now I maybe tip this board back a little bit so that those trees run downwards, not upwards. Okay, now let's let that dry. See what you think. Okay, it dried mostly, and it dried pretty sepia-ish. Mostly I can see that sepia brown in here, which is fine. I think it's done. I'm just going to put a few finishing touches, which is just going to be to say I'll put a few little tips of the trees up here. If I really wanted to make them a little finer, I'd probably be smart to use my rigger right here. Again, it's not a tree exercise, so you can blow past this part of the video. I just want you to practice more than once, seeing how you do with throwing graded wash in there with several colors. And remember, keep them analogous, keep them close neighbors on the color wheel, and you should be all right. And as these trees dry, I just wanted them to provide us with a little bit of drama on this dark silhouette. So we've got our mottled wash, we've got our 3-colored wash, and finally, a fun one to try is a bullseye. And in this kind of a wash, I'll put wash here as well, I'll call it a bullseye wash. Instead of keeping things so horizontal, like we did with this 3-color graded wash here, we're going to make it concentric. We're going to start with a warm color in the center, and then gradually move our way outward with darker pigment. I want to make sure that these are analogous colors from our color wheel, so that they really blend together beautifully. We have to do this wet and wet. I'm going to start with warm, let's say a yellow in that center, and we're going to keep using our mister and keep that baby wet as we turn the board. You'll see how this works. It's a lot of fun. Let's give it a try. Okay, let's just go one step further with that idea of the 3 colors blended together for our sky and try a bullseye. I'm basically going to just take that 3-color graded wash that we tried last time and curve it into a circle. Again, we need to have 3 colors that go together well. Why don't we try 3 warm colors? We'll get some yellow going. I'm going to use a mixture of lemon yellow and maybe a little bit of yellow medium. We're going to see if we can get that to look nice with moving towards orange, let's say, and then towards red. So we'll put orange, little test sheet here, see if we're on the right track. I'm using cadmium red and cadmium orange. I think those look pretty darn good together. What I'm looking at is the way that the granules of pigment intersperse with each other and making sure that those go together nicely, that they really complement each other, that they aren't creating any muddy colors, that it stays bright and fresh. That's what I want to have happen to my bullseye. Now I'm going to start with one color in the dead center, making a sort of a circle, and then around that with a bagel shape, I'm going to put the orange, and then finally the red. The key to this whole fun of bullseye is you got to really have wet paper. You've got to really be ready with your misting bottle. You've got to have some clean spray ready, and you have to keep turning your board. If you've been painting on the table so far, now's the time to get a piece of cardboard or something and tape your paper to it, because you do have to pick it up and tip it and turn it and mess around with it. You're basically painting using your eye and your turning muscles, if there are such a thing. Okay, I've got a wet in wet situation. I'm going to now load the center part with a lot of yellow pigment. It's really crucial. You can't go wrong with too much. Whoa, my orange is getting into my puddle. It's okay. I'm going to go to orange anyhow. Okay, but I'm going to start in the middle with a lot of yellow pigment. I can just sort of like have the pigment run off the tip of my 1-inch flat brush. That's a lot of pigment. I've almost made a puddle right on my paper. I'm going to rinse that out and go for just orange now, not this messed up mixture of puddle I made. Let's get that nice and loaded. And now I'm going to make that bagel orange around the yellow. When in doubt, get more pigment, this side especially. I'd say even once more, let's not be shy here. Orange. Okay, and now cadmium red. I'm going to make a puddle over here. And this one's going on the very outer limits. Okay, more cad red. This one's going to actually take more pigment. It's covering more real estate out here on the fringes of our paper. More pigment. More pigment. Okay, I've got a lot of pigment of those 3 colors. I'm going to mist the whole thing. I tried to mist it pretty evenly, and now I'm going to tip it. This is important. I'm going to tip it to the left for a little bit. I'm going to tip it down, tip it to the right, tip it towards me a little bit. I'm going to spray it again. My colors aren't flowing too well today. You're going to find that paper makes a difference on this experiment too. Try some different papers. If you only have one kind, then you're in the same boat I am right here with this piece of paper. We got to make this thing work. Okay, I'm going to tip it down. I'm letting that red come in from the side. That's okay. That's fine. This time I picked up quite a bit of the extra. I'm going to go to the left. I'm going to tip it away from me, tip it to the right, tip it towards me. And I'm going to mist it. I like to think of this, it helps me a little bit if I think of it almost like in the directions. So I always have to keep trying to go all 4 directions. So I'm going to go north after I see a lot of good rivulets going, east, south, I'm going to mist it a little bit, west. Okay, boy, this requires patience, right? Before our arms fall off, let's just stop. I think I'm going to just let that dry now. But if you are patient enough, if you reach that level of Zen masterhood and you can just keep turning for a long, long time, you will interlock the molecules of pigment in ways that look very, very gentle, smooth transitions from yellow to orange to red. Now, of course, those aren't the only triad of colors you can use, but let's get this dry first and then see what we might do with it. Once that's dry, you can start to see how gentle that transition of colors is. I'm going to look at this now with my artist's brain going full bore because I want to see what direction do I see something interesting happening. The most obvious thing would be sort of a sunrise or sunset, and you can look at different directions to see what that might be. You could also think of an interesting kind of composition with maybe like a series of street lamps and a street scene at night. And there are a number of artists that get mileage out of making dramatic urban scenes at nighttime, and their center of light is so radiant because possibly they know the bullseye trick. I leave this to your imagination now to put in a landscape, put in a silhouette of trees if you want to try that. Practice it several times. Change up your paper, your colors, how often you missed it. You want to keep going until you really are sure you've broken down. Notice I can't really see my orange bagel anymore. It's kind of got disappeared by that process of tipping all 4 directions over and over and over again. Really takes patience, but I know you've got it in you. If you want some inspiration for watercolor sunsets, there's some little paintings that that Georgia O'Keeffe made when she still lived in Texas that are just wonderful little watercolor studies. It reminds me of this. As I looked at this, I thought of her because she didn't worry about whether things were concentric or asymmetrical. They're just gorgeous little chances to let the paint run and bleed and do wonderful things on the paper. I hope you had some fun working on these different sky ideas. And if you keep using these small pieces of paper, I'm going to encourage you to do a lot more experiments with it. Get so that you really feel like you have an understanding of how that spray is going to affect your final painting or lifting or blending some of your colors in some of your washes. Up next, let's talk about trees. Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson, and happy painting. Oh yeah, look at that sky. Okay now.